Okay, it's on. Hello, everybody. And let's talk about Outer Wilds and how we designed for curiosity, a word that I've said so many times this week it has lost all meaning. So I'm the director of Outer Wilds. I'm part of the team at Mobius. And I'm also one half of the design team. I'm 1/3 of the story team. And I'm going to apologize right now for how many times I'm going to reference Zelda in this presentation. So for those who are unfamiliar, Outer Wilds is an open-world mystery where you explore a solar system that's trapped at a 22-minute time loop. You do this by investigating the ruins and writings of an alien civilization. You're trying to figure out what the hell is going on. People have described this as Myst in space, and they're not wrong. I'm gonna keep spoilers light, but I'm gonna spoil a couple puzzle solutions. And honestly, like everything in this game is technically a spoiler, so this is just fair warning. Outer Wilds exists for a couple of reasons. One is that we wanted to make a space exploration game that really captures the feeling of venturing into the unknown out of sheer curiosity, sort of that idea that humans have no business being in space at all, but we do it because we want to know what's out there. And the other reason is that Skyward Sword broke me as a person. This game, I really love how the Zelda series as a whole handles exploration. It's one of the reasons why I love those games so much. But this game, and I'm sure all of you have played it, it just sort of goes out of its way to just over-explain everything. And it's a good example of how doing that can really drain the sense of player discovery. This game just had no faith in its players' own curiosity. And it made us wonder, could we make a game that has absolutely no explicit objectives, but still encourages and rewards player curiosity? And so first, I'm just going to define what I mean by curiosity. It's a need, a thirst, or a desire for knowledge. And then while we're here, exploration is all activities concerned with gathering information about the environment. And if we slam them together, we get curiosity-driven exploration, which is gathering information about the environment, exploration, out of a desire for knowledge. And that is the specific type of exploration that we really wanted to kind of instill and reward with Outer Wilds. So some examples of curiosity-driven exploration would be exploring the remains of an ancient culture, exploring the rules of nature at a high-energy particle collider, or even something as simple as climbing a mountain because you are curious to see the view from the top. And so all of these can be framed as a question where the goal of exploration is to find an answer to that question. So how did this ancient culture live? How does the universe work at the smallest scales? Why is Todd Howard so obsessed with mountains? And if you're designing for curiosity-driven exploration, your first step, sort of the first thing you have to fulfill is you have to get players curious enough to ask a question in the first place. And then the second part of that is you have to let them know sort of how can they go investigate further? Where should they explore to find the answer? But you can't actually tell them to do this, or you're breaking the whole no explicit goals rule. And this isn't like a brand new thing we invented. There are lots of games that do this. You usually have to look outside the critical path. There's a bunch of examples I could pull from. I'm going to use Zelda. So this is from the Wind Waker. There is a gallery in the game of pictographs, that's what the game calls pictures, that are taken of sort of weird oddities from across the Great Sea. And you can ask Lenzo, the character who took these pictures, about them, and they'll give you just a little small descriptor to kind of make you interested, and then they'll tell you where you could go to see where the picture was taken. And they don't tell you to do this, but if you're curious, you can go investigate, and you'll actually find the thing in question. And this isn't part of the main story. I don't even know how much they intended for this to happen. But it's interesting, and it feels really cool, like it's rewarding you for being curious. And we wondered, what if this was just the entire game? And so, yes, Outer Wilds is pretty much just Wind Waker's pictograph gallery taken to its logical extreme. So we built a world where everything that the player discovers is telling a story about something that physically exists elsewhere in the world. Oh my God, that's too far. All right, and so the way we went about structuring the game to do this is we came up with this idea of a curiosity. Yeah, we just use this word way too much in development. A curiosity for us is a location in the world that answers a major question like, why am I stuck in this time loop? And each of them is hidden in a secret location, or often usually a dangerous location. And you can only reach it if you have specific knowledge, like how do I reach the core of Giant's Deep? And then our original idea was that each one was the things you just find by exploring around on the surface level are clues, and the clues tell you a piece of information you need to reach the curiosity, and they also sort of let you know the curiosity exists, and they point to the other clues, so it doesn't matter where you enter this web. And this actually eventually turned into the way the game represents the player's own knowledge of sort of like what they've found and discovered, which is the ship log. And you can see in the final version, it kind of ended up a bit messier than we originally planned. We have like clues leading to the curiosity, and certain clues don't point to other clues, but sort of the idea is still there. And the other idea was that each curiosity is on a different planet, and all the clues are scattered around, because we didn't want players to explore planet by planet. We wanted to encourage them to explore by curiosity, because each curiosity is a question, so the player picks the one that they are most interested in finding the answer to, and then the clues give them the tools to go do so. So all of that was sort of to set up why we tried to do any of this in the first place. The really hard part was kind of figuring out how to actually get players to ask these questions and how to make them curious without us just like beating them on the head and telling them what to do. And so in part 2, I want to do sort of a deep dive into, we spent the last 4 years sort of working on these problems and sort of the things we found, the play tests we did. It's going to take about 2 hours. And let's see, we have 14 minutes. So instead, here are 10 weird tricks to make players curious. You won't believe number 6. So, number 1, remove unwanted player motivations. How do we know if players are exploring because they're curious or if they're exploring for some other reason? You get rid of the other reasons. They can't be exploring because they want to find all the collectibles if there are no collectibles. And our idea was, if the only reward for exploring is knowledge and they're still playing the game, they must be curious. And the keywords there are if they're still playing the game. 2, players can't be curious about something specific if they're curious about literally everything. So this is way back. Our first approach at the intro to this game started with players using their telescope, and they saw this meteor crash out of the sky. And it falls on the far side of the village. Yeah, this is like 7 years ago. We were like, great, we'll start a game about curiosity with players asking this question of, I wonder what crashed over beyond the horizon, and they'll have to go investigate before they can lift off into space. But what we failed to realize is that in actuality, what's going through players' heads at this moment is something a little more like this. Because all of this is new to them. You can't just throw people into a brand new environment and then be like, no, be curious about this in particular. And so we changed our goal from trying to make people curious about this crashed alien artifact to just making people curious about space, like in general. And this is where we shifted everything to, hey, you're the newest astronaut in the space program, it's launch day, all you have to do is go get the launch codes from the observatory. But along the way, we're going to like secretly try to make you curious and excited to actually go into space. And one of the ways we did that is we added this museum in the observatory where you get the launch codes, which is full of exhibits and kind of a direct callback to that gallery from the Wind Waker. And this is sort of us trying to let people know, like, hey, this is a game where questions have answers, and we're also trying to get you curious about something, but not sort of like anything in particular, just sort of in general. But that doesn't stop not having an objective from freaking a lot of people out. And it's understandable because you've just completed the first and only explicit objective in the game, which is getting the launch codes. And also, players just expect games on some level to tell them what they should be doing. And so we have this character who gives you the launch codes named Hornfels. And the idea was sort of they would set up the tone of exploration in the game. And so originally, they had this sort of vague text about things are changing in space, nature's happening, but more than usual. And because we didn't want to tell you too much, but we wanted to make it sound interesting so you'd want to go explore. It didn't work. It was too vague. So our next try is we added these 2 options where players could ask, where do I go once I launch, or what's my mission? And if you ask them what's my mission, they would say, there are no missions. And honestly, that might have been worse. Some people are just like, all right, I'm out. And then some of the people who like really needed to hear that also just like picked one of the first 2 options anyway and just missed all of that text. So the final version that ended up in the game is we have Hornfels ask you, what are you going to do once you're in space? And then we give you a variety of answers. We pulled a lot of these from watching people play and how they chose to explore the game. And I think just from watching people do this, like having to make the choice on their own, it actually forces them to think through, what am I going to do once I'm in space? And makes it clear that that is on them. And then we actually would see in playtests, a lot of people would follow through on what they chose in this conversation. Like if they said, I'm going to go meet the travelers, later they would actually go and meet a traveler. 4, subtlety is for cowards. So yeah, I feel a little bad about talking about this because it seems so obvious, but if you make something weird enough, people are going to be curious about it. We have this thing called the quantum moon, and it disappears if you fly through it. And just once that happens, everyone wants to know what it is. Like, we've never had any trouble at all getting people curious about the quantum moon. The other is we have this probe cannon that always explodes in the sky whenever you wake up at the start of a loop. And this is also just like has never been a problem. We kept making the explosion bigger and bigger so people would notice it sooner. But it's just like a surefire way. And these two things in particular are curiosities. So that was really great that we were able to that's why they're so obvious. A slightly less obvious thing is the way we design the art style and all of the level design to make it really obvious where sort of the interesting explorable content is. We really didn't want to have players sort of exploring every nook and cranny just in case we stashed a secret somewhere. Because this is supposed to be a game where you have questions and you're exploring very intentionally. We don't want you to explore like you're mowing the lawn and like, oh, I missed a spot. And so, again, it's fairly obvious, but here's the content. And here's like some grass and I guess like a river, but like there's just so clearly nothing there that, of interest. 5, there's no such thing as just lore. So this was something where players coming from other games would have some trouble because, again, you find some text like an open journal conveniently lying around in the world. And a lot of times you assume that, oh, it's giving me interesting story information, or maybe I'll go on Wikipedia later and sort of try to piece together what it all means. But you don't expect it to be actionable information necessarily. And in Outer Wilds, there really isn't nothing's just lore. Everything sort of has, our writer Kelsey had sort of the unenviable task of having to convey story information, develop characters, and convey sort of like these really crucial clues all at the same time. But everything's important, and it took some doing and a lot of iterations to get the text to the point where players would just understand this. So an example is this cave on Ember Twin, where Know My Children used to play a game that's pretty much an alien version of Sharks and Minnows. And their text that they wrote is just them talking about the rules of the game. And it's supposed to teach you this clue that anglerfish are blind. That's like the big spoiler. And so the original text, only 2 of the lines out of 9 were actually delivering the information that were sort of supposed to be the clue. And they're just sort of like woven into everything else. So you'd have to, if you were playing really close attention, you would realize, oh, this is important. But it's a lot of players just reading this are like, oh, cool, it's telling me the story of how the kids used to play a game. But it's not clear what the takeaway is. And so we rewrote this to focus more directly on sort of the clue part of it. And so we changed it so that the rule in question that's important is actually like a new addition to the game. Levy says, rule change, and then says the rule. And then we added this sub-conversation where the kids actually talk about why the rule was even added in the first place. And it's because real anglerfish are blind and they wanted the game to be scientifically accurate. We also reduced the total number of lines from 9 to 8, but the number of relevant clue-related lines has gone up to 4. So now it's 4 out of 8 lines are actually like relevant to this. And we did this sort of across the game. We kept going back to text and doing this level of sort of like honing in on, like it has to focus on the clue or people aren't gonna get it. And then sort of as a corollary to that, 5B, remove anything that actually is lore only. We used to have these signal devices on 2 of the planets, and it explained in the story how the Nomai communicated when they were stranded on 2 different planets, but it didn't have anything to do with any of the 4 major curiosities, and we didn't want to set like a bad precedent, so we got rid of them. 6, quest markers are your friend. Except you can't believe number 6. Quest markers are the first evil. I'm sure I'm not the only one who finds screens like this just like panic-inducing. But the real reason I kind of have an issue with quest markers, or at least the way they are done a lot, is that they make it easy to progress through the story without understanding why you're progressing through the story. Like you can just kind of go down and treat it like a checkbox list, and then you're done, but you might not actually have any idea what happened, which can be an issue if you're getting deeper and deeper into the story. And one of the really cool things we saw is with the way the game is structured in Outer Wilds is that we noticed that it's easier for players to get invested when understanding the story is a requirement for advancing the story. And then I'm just going to do a quick shout out to Breath of the Wild, because they do this cool thing where they do use quest markers, but it points you to the person who gave you the quest, not to where the quest is leading you, so you still have to sort of pay attention to the actual information that's being given to you. 7, create narrative suspense. This is another one I almost feel bad about even including, because it's pretty much just people want to know how stories end. Like there's a reason why Outer Wilds, the overarching narrative is so mystery heavy. And it's because, you tease people with the start of like a narrative thread and then explore here to find how it all ends. And we ended up doing this more and more over the course of development on a more and more micro level. And so we have this example. Anomai says, Coleus is missing. He vanished from the lakebed cave, then explicit directions on how to reach the lakebed cave several days ago, and we're unable to find any trace of him. And so we've given you the information of where to go. You don't need a quest marker for that. And then this very obvious, like, a lot of people are like, yeah, I want to know what happened to Coleus. Did they find him? They did. Spoiler. He's fine. And why did he vanish? 8. Players pay more attention when the story is relevant to their immediate experience. So this one is, we have this text, we do this happens throughout the game, but there's this really good example on Ember Twin where you're following Nomai text, this path they took from their crashed escape pod to the Sunless City where they eventually rebuilt sort of their society. And the text is giving you direct clues on how to follow this path. And they say, we must hurry because the pathway there is filling with sand. Don't allow yourself to become buried by sand and make sure no one is lost. And the player looks to their right and they're like, oh yeah, it is filling with sand. I should also hurry. And originally the Nomai text didn't actually say this. And we added it because when players feel like they are experiencing the same thing as the embedded narrative they're reading about, we noticed that they would pay a lot more attention to that narrative, which is also giving them other clues they need to pay attention to. And so in this case, we wanted them to feel like they were also under similar time pressures and kind of had a similar objective to the Nomai. The downside of this is you really shouldn't stage your embedded narrative thousands of years in the past if you're going to do this style of design, because it just makes it really hard to come up with reasons why the things that happened to this ancient people thousands of years ago, why did they have experiences that are directly related to the player's experience? And I think we worked most of it out in the end, but just, I don't know. I don't know if I would do that again. One of the ways we did sort of get around that issue is 9, emphasize a contradiction. And so this is, on the left, we have Nomai text that says that there was a problem with the power of the orbital probe cannon and that the cannon actually was decommissioned. They're not going to launch it. And then immediately to the right, we have this computer that says 6 minutes ago, the cannon totally launched. And it creates this obvious disconnect. Well, which one of these is right? And it gets you to go investigate to figure out kind of what's going on. Why is this so obviously contradictory? And then 10, use provocative signage. This one sort of relates to the overarching philosophy of the way we sort of try to get people curious in the game. But it kind of started because we have a lot of these paths on planets. And in the game now, you'll find a lot of signage that tells you where a path is going to lead. And for a long time, we didn't have that. And we were worried about adding it because we didn't want to demystify these environments. And the reason we finally pulled the trigger on that is because if you reach a fork in the road with like 3 paths branching, we didn't want people to just do a random dice roll to figure out which way they should go. We wanted them to have a little bit of information, something that made them ask a question of, oh, I know I want to go on this path because I want to know a little more about what I've been told about what might be at the end. And it seems silly, but a sign actually kind of does that. And especially if you find a sign that says gravity cannon, you're like, what the hell? I want to know what a gravity cannon is. But that metaphor sort of extends to the whole game, where we always want players to have a question and be exploring intentionally instead of just sort of aimlessly wandering until they've either combed through the entire environment or just stumbled on something. And that ends the spoilers and the talk. Thank you for listening.
Do we have any questions? Oh, we have one.
Hi. First off, brilliant game, really loved it, but something that kind of struck out to me earlier in your presentation was you talked about how you like cut out everything else that was any kind of other kind of progression-y stuff. Do you feel that that's like ultimately antithetical to creating player curiosity? Like, do you think you could integrate these ideas into a game that was more, say, Zelda-like, for lack of a better term, where you do actually have more explicit progression like that? Do you think that would just kind of kill the whole premise that you had of just having players follow their curiosity?
I think you could do it. The reason we did that is just so we could be like really damn sure for us, in particular. Also, we do have the ship log, which you could argue could be treated as a form of progression. We tried really hard to make it not give you any like leading statements, but
Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking in terms of progression is like actual like avatar strength, for lack of a better term, like the idea that the player can gain skills that are valid for the game environment that aren't
Oh, yeah.
necessarily just
Yeah, I
knowledge,
think-
but yeah.
totally.
Okay. Fair enough.
Hey, so I enjoyed the humorous comment of subtlety is for cowards with the examples you had, but I often find subtlety is a great way to make the player feel engaged, feel like they discovered something that you obviously led them to through clever use of it. So how did you use subtlety in your game, or did you really like have to use less and less of it because there was so much discovery in the game?
I think the honest answer is that every single thing in this game was too subtle at first. And it was just like cranking that dial to the point where, because yeah, we didn't want to hit people on the head with anything, but especially when there's so much going on and vying for their attention, if you really want someone to notice something, you kind of just need it to be this giant glowy thing in the sky.
Got it.
So playing your game as a designer made me super anxious because you guys are insane. But you made an amazing game at the end of the day, so congratulations. Love it a lot. But did you ever, at some point, because you were going so against what is typically conventional, did you ever have any doubts, either through feedback for like QA, and like how did you stay the course to make this amazing game?
The biggest doubt was definitely that first village I loosely touched on with like the meteor falling and like that was a train wreck. But once we sort of had redone that and had the museum and sort of saw that, once we saw someone sort of be curious and explore on purpose because something made them curious, like the first time we saw that happen, it was like, okay, we just got to figure out how to make this happen for more people. And that was sort of the rest of development, was figuring out how to generalize what a few people do naturally. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex.
All right, thank you.